It started with a scream. A 2-year-old boy jolted awake, night after night, clutching his chest and shouting, "Airplane on fire! Little man can't get out!" His terrified parents thought it was just a phase, until he began naming places he'd never been, people he'd never met, and describing a war he'd never been taught. They thought it was imagination, until the facts started lining up. This is the true story of a boy who claimed he lived a past life, and may have proved it. James Leininger was just 2 years old when the nightmares began. His parents, Bruce and Andrea, were confused and a little shaken. James would kick, scream, and cry out phrases far beyond what any toddler should know. And the words were always the same: planes crashing, fire, being trapped inside a cockpit. The first time it happened, they rushed into his room thinking he'd hurt himself. But James was curled up in bed, sweating and panicked. He kept yelling, "Airplane crash! Plane on fire! Little man can't get out!" Andrea tried comforting him. Bruce dismissed it as normal night terrors, but the dreams didn't stop. They came every night, sometimes twice. Soon James became obsessed. He crashed toy planes nose first into furniture, mimicking an explosion. When his mother corrected him, telling him that planes land on their wheels, he looked at her and calmly replied, "It exploded on fire." At first it was unsettling, but then it turned disturbing. James began identifying very specific military aircraft. He said his plane was a Corsair, a World War II fighter known for its bent wings. When shown a different model, he'd shake his head and say, "That's not my plane." He talked about drop tanks, aircraft carriers, and battles in the Pacific. He even claimed his plane took off from a boat called the Natoma. His parents had no idea what that meant. There were no World War II books in the house, no history documentaries, no war-obsessed family members feeding him this information. Still unsure, they asked James who he was in the dream. His response? James III. That's when they stopped brushing it off. In one chilling conversation, James told his father he flew a plane that was shot down by the Japanese. He said his plane had been hit in the engine and crashed into the water. When asked who else was there, James calmly said, "Jack Larson. He was a friend of mine." Bruce was stunned. That name meant nothing to him, but he wrote it down. Over the next few weeks, he started digging, and what he found made his blood run cold. There was a World War II aircraft carrier called the USS Natoma Bay, stationed in the Pacific during the Battle of Iwo Jima, and on that ship's roster was a pilot named James Houston Jr., killed in action when his plane was hit by enemy fire and crashed into the ocean. Houston was the only pilot from that crew who died in that battle. He flew a Corsair, and, yes, his wingman was named Jack Larson. Everything James had described was now backed by actual military records. The details only got more exact. James described the plane's undercarriage, the specific model, and even the location of the hit, on the engine. He drew diagrams of dogfights and named other pilots in Houston's squadron. When his parents tracked those names down, they were real people, living veterans who confirmed the details James somehow knew. At just 3 years old, James was retelling classified, first-hand combat accounts from a war that ended over 50 years before he was even born. His parents reached out to surviving members of the Natoma Bay crew. Many were skeptical, until James started talking. They asked questions. He gave answers no child should know. And when shown a photo of a group of men from the ship, James pointed and said, "That's me." He had picked James Houston Jr. out of a black and white photo without hesitation. This wasn't just strange anymore, it was unexplainable. As word of James's story spread, researchers, psychologists, and journalists began to pay attention. This wasn't some internet rumor. It was backed by documentation, names, interviews, and wartime records. And what fascinated everyone most was how nothing could explain how he knew so much. Dr. Jim Tucker, a child psychiatrist from the University of Virginia, was one of the first experts to study the case. He had been investigating children's past life memories for years, but even he called James's story one of the most compelling he'd ever seen. He met with the Leininger family and reviewed the facts. James's nightmares started at age 2. He correctly named a World War II aircraft carrier and a pilot who died on it. He identified real people connected to that pilot's life. He described war tactics, mechanical parts, and specific missions, and he had no known exposure to any of it. Dr. Tucker wasn't the only one intrigued. James appeared in multiple interviews, documentaries, and books. What stood out most was his calm, detailed, and emotionally consistent storytelling. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't fishing for approval. He was simply remembering. Bruce, James's father, had once been a hard skeptic. He even used to mock people who believed in reincarnation. But he slowly began collecting evidence and cataloging every statement James made. Over time, he built a journal that read like an investigator's case file. Through his research, Bruce discovered that James Houston Jr. was a real man, a Navy pilot who died during the Battle of Iwo Jima, flying a Corsair off the USS Natoma Bay. Everything James said lined up with Houston's known history. And the most unbelievable detail? James claimed he was shot down by the Japanese. Military records confirmed Houston's plane was hit in the engine during an attack and crashed exactly where James described. Even the Jack Larson detail was accurate. He was Houston's actual wingman during the mission, still alive, still traceable, still stunned that a toddler somehow knew his name. James even visited a reunion of the USS Natoma Bay veterans. Some were skeptical until James started talking. He described the layout of the ship, mentioned crew nicknames, and asked about minor events that had happened during combat, things that had never been published, details that only someone who was there would know. Multiple men said the child's knowledge of the ship and crew was disturbingly accurate. Some walked away from the event shaken, openly admitting, "I don't know how that kid knows what he knows." Still, skeptics had theories. Some believed the parents unintentionally planted ideas in James's mind, maybe through books or conversations he overheard. Others suggested cryptomnesia, a condition where forgotten information resurfaces without the person knowing where it came from. But those explanations had holes. The Leiningers didn't own any military books. There were no family members who'd served in World War II. James had never been around anyone who could have known the things he was saying. And he wasn't just recalling vague ideas. He was citing names, dates, equipment, locations, and relationships from a life he should have known nothing about. Even after all the theories, the fact remained. James had access to extremely specific, emotionally charged memories from a war that ended decades before he was born. Years later, when James was about 6, his parents asked him one last time about the moment his plane went down. He paused and said, "I was shot in the engine, it caught fire, I crashed. That's when I left my body, and I came back." When they asked where he came back to, James quietly pointed to himself and said, "Here." And then he walked away. Whether you believe in reincarnation or not, the story of James Leininger is hard to ignore. A young boy barely able to read or write recalled the exact details of a pilot's life and death during World War II, down to names, ship designations, and mission locations. And not just once, but over and over, without fail. His memories faded as he grew older, just like many other children in past life studies. But the evidence left behind, it's still there. Documented, recorded, and echoed by real veterans who were there. Skeptics try to explain it. Psychologists study it. Believers say it's undeniable. But in the end, one thing is clear. James Leininger remembered a life he never lived, and somehow proved it. If this case gave you chills, wait until you hear what happened in the final moments of Flight MH370, a mystery that shook the entire world. Watch that next right here. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos that prove what happens when logic fails.